Boston Harbor's famously a spot where stuff gets dumped into the water. But at the city's Waterfront Institute of Contemporary Art, the scene on Saturday wasn't exactly that of a mass steeping of black tea in an act of protest.
The Red Bull Cliff Diving World Series Boston event is a cliff diving event where 12 men and 12 women jump from the Institute of Contemporary Art into the Boston Harbor. The men compete from 27 meter and the women compete from 21 meter.
That's one of the competitors of this Cliff Diving World Series. Seen here executing a dive from a platform atop this arts building before thousands of cheering spectators. Now, this particular World Series in Boston is a far cry from what you might expect to see at Fenway Park. But organizers say this Red Bull Cliff Diving World Series brought out more than 45,000 people over the weekend to witness these elite athletes plunge from up to 90 feet in the air into cold water. An act that's not exactly for the faint of heart in a somewhat literal sense.
For a lot of the athletes, the hardest part is just in those few moments before the dive, because your heart rate's going, you got to calm yourself down, you got to make sure that you know what you're doing. Once you take off, hopefully your body will take over, autopilot kicks in, and you know what you're doing. But those few seconds right before, there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of nerves, it's very scary. So in my opinion, that's the hardest part of the dive.
Now, for those who haven't yet had the opportunity to jump off of a cliff, the site that used to give everyone driving directions before Google Maps came along says cliff diving is the least complicated extreme sport, as it requires no equipment, no special clothing, and no provider services to hire. And Red Bull, the beverage behind what they call the ultimate display of focus and skill, claims the sport originated in 1700s Hawaii, when Maui's King Kahekili popularized the leaping off of holy cliffs. Now, you may have noticed that this building isn't a cliff, but that's fine. It turns out the sport still works. And this particular incarnation is more akin to Olympic high diving, the kind of activity that attracts a very special type of athlete. The type that needs to train incredibly hard to make sure their entries into the water are perfect before they, jump off of a roof.
Some things that to be careful that you don't do, and we go through a lot of training to make sure that doesn't happen, is what's called getting lost, where you don't know where you are in the air. And it's really scary because you're basically out of control. So obviously we do a lot of training to make sure that doesn't happen, but that's one of the dangers, and sometimes if you don't land as well as you want to, it hurts. It hurts on the best dives, it hurts even more on the worst dives.
This was the third year straight this World Series came to Boston, and marks its 100th stop since the event began in 2009. The same year that Pilot had his own splashdown in the Hudson River. And this year's format featured separate men's and women's competitions that were adjudicated by an international panel of 5 judges.
For the men, when they compete, they are in the air for about 3 seconds. And when the women compete, they're in the air for a little bit under 2 seconds. So everything happens very fast. You have to know what to do in just a split-second amount of time. So that takes a lot of training. It's difficult, just being able to adapt to the things around you and the weather changing. And it's a different place each time, sometimes just some difficulties in the sport.
Our competitor here, Maylee Carpenter from the USA, ended up ranking 4th, with Australian Rhiannon Iflin taking 1st in the female competition, and Brit Aiden Heslop taking top spot in the men's. The World Series of Cliff Diving is set to continue across the world until its conclusion in Sydney this November, after which all the competitors' points will be added up, championship trophies will be awarded, and of course, there will be a distribution of the winner's prize fund. Now, in case you're not the type to jump off a cliff into a frigid cold body of water in hopes of getting some sweet cash, why not try magnet fishing? As we told you about the other day on your news refresh, please subscribe, this guy just threw a magnet into a lake in Queens, New York, and pulled out a safe containing tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Now that is quite the splash.